Scene 2144A.
Sir, at the time that you first found out about the atomic bomb, did you regard it as a curse or a blessing to mankind?
Well, I thought it was a blessing. I thought it could be used and made a blessing. I never worried about its being a curse. I wanted a weapon that would win the war, and it did. That's what I was interested in.
The Manhattan Project, a top-secret endeavor that changed the landscape of global warfare and international relations. Even to this day, we can see its impact in debates over military strategies, the challenges of arms control, and organizations' efforts to ensure global security.
The Manhattan Project began in response to fears that Nazi Germany was developing nuclear weapons. In 1939, Albert Einstein signed a letter addressed to FDR, warning that the Nazis were beginning to develop them along with their potential impact. He urged the U.S. to stockpile uranium ore and begin working on its own.
The idea of a nuclear bomb itself was relatively new. Only 7 years prior, in 1932, had James Chadwick discovered the neutron, which was a crucial part of this, as it had no electric charge. Through his and Enrico Fermi's experiments, they discovered that bombarding elements with neutrons made them radioactive, which is critical for nuclear reactions.
A year before, two scientists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann, discovered that bombarding uranium with neutrons produced barium, a lighter element. When they consulted fellow scientists Lisa Meitner and her nephew Otto Frisch, they realized that nucleus of uranium was being split into smaller parts, a process they termed as fission.
Essentially, splitting heavy atomic nuclei could release enormous amounts of energy. If a controlled chain reaction could be achieved, it would release an unprecedented amount of energy, making it a high potential option for weapons. Germany also had a little bit of a head start on this development, exacerbating Einstein's fears about the bomb.
By February 1940, $6,000 was made available to start research by FDR, initially under the supervision of a committee headed by Lyman Briggs. After the U.S. entered World War II, following the Pearl Harbor attacks, the Manhattan District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was assigned management of construction work, with General Leslie R. Groves placed in charge of all Army activities in 1942. Groves personally recruited Robert Oppenheimer from UC Berkeley to lead their scientific efforts.
Under Oppenheimer's leadership, Los Alamos became the heart of the Manhattan Project. Los Alamos was the perfect site because it was simultaneously isolated and close to other key sites, such as Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington. Workers at all locations were on a need-to-know basis, often not even knowing the full extent of their jobs.
Over the next few years, the scientists worked tirelessly, collaborating on either the theory needed or practical aspects of the bomb's development. They focused on concepts like the required critical mass or developing insights regarding atomic structure. There was also a focus on designing technologies such as calutrons, which could separate uranium-235 from uranium-238, the former of which was important for constructing the bomb.
Eventually, these efforts culminated in the Trinity test on July 16, 1945. The test happened in the New Mexico desert, and was the first successful detonation of a nuclear weapon. This validated the past 30 years of work and proved the bomb's potential. The explosion was equivalent to 19 kilotons of TNT.
Seeing the test was successful, FDR's successor, Harry Truman, had to decide. Initially, when the project started, the idea was to drop the bomb on Germany. However, Germany had already surrendered about 2 months prior. If the US was to drop the bomb, it would be on Japan instead. After debate, Truman decided to use the atomic bombs on Japan to hasten the end of World War II and avoid a potential costly invasion of Japan, which he reasoned would help save both American and Japanese lives on the long run. He also wanted to send a message to the Soviet Union about the power of the United States' new weapon. Despite fighting on the same side of the war, tensions were still high between the two countries.
On August 6, 1945, the Little Boy bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, causing immense destruction. An estimated 140,000 people died. The bomb flattened buildings, ignited fires, and left the entire area in ruins. Just 3 days later, as Japan was just recovering, the Fat Man atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, killing another 70,000 people. Once again, the bomb destroyed everything in its path, compounding the shock and devastation felt by Japan from the first bomb. The second bomb was dropped not only to solidify the message of the US's power, but also as a way for the scientists to see if the different material used in the second bomb, plutonium, had a different effect than the first. The bombs had their intended effect, hastening Japan's surrender. Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, with the formal surrender ceremony taking place aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945.
The shockwaves of the bombings were felt worldwide and immediately demonstrated the destructive power of nuclear weapons and signaled the beginning of a new era in warfare and international relations. The US was now a military superpower along with Russia. Their dislike of each other's political systems, Democrat versus Communist, was exacerbated, and the relationship had a high amount of mutual distrust.
Klaus Fuchs, a key scientist at Los Alamos, had also been a double agent during the course of the Manhattan Project, passing key details about the weapons to the Soviets, allowing them to accelerate their nuclear program, which otherwise would have been years behind that of the United States. He was eventually caught and sentenced to 14 years in prison.
Once the Soviet Union developed their own bomb, both countries heavily feared an attack from the other. Tensions were high after the Potsdam Conference, and the Cold War began. It was called the Cold War because neither side could launch an attack out of fear of retaliation.
The fear of communism in the United States led to foreign policies focused on containing the spread of Soviet influence. This led to various policies such as the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan, which were aimed at supporting countries resisting communism. Both the USA and Russia practiced nuclear deterrence, the idea of building more nuclear weapons to deter other countries from attacking them with their nuclear weapons through the promise of severe retaliation and possibly mutually assured destruction, which no one wanted.
Though Oppenheimer was the scientific director of the Manhattan Project, after he saw the destructive power, he became an open opponent to the arms race, highlighting the ethical issues and dangers behind the weapons, heavily emphasizing the idea of mutually assured destruction.
The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 was the closest the world ever came to nuclear war. It began when the United States discovered Soviet missiles in Cuba, which led to an intense standoff between President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev, who both engaged in high-stakes negotiations. The crisis was eventually resolved when Kennedy secretly agreed to remove U.S. missiles from Turkey in exchange for Khrushchev publicly removing Soviet missiles from Cuba. This also led to the establishment of a direct communication link between Washington and Moscow.
Afterwards, to limit nuclear proliferation, various treaties were established, including the 1968 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT. Other agreements, like the Anti-Ballistic Missile ABM Treaty, aimed to maintain the deterrence balance. Despite challenges, these efforts were crucial in global arms control and reducing nuclear conflict risks.
The global nuclear landscape remains complex, with countries like North Korea and Iran challenging non-proliferation efforts. Organizations, such as the International Atomic Energy Agency, monitor nuclear activities to ensure compliance with international agreements. There are also many advancements in missile defense and efforts to reduce nuclear stockpiles in an attempt to protect global security.
The Manhattan Project ushered in the atomic age, ending World War II with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It established the U.S. as the dominant power and began the Cold War, with MAD preventing nuclear war. Ethical debates arose, notably from Oppenheimer, who later opposed the arms race. Efforts like the NPT and ABM Treaty were crucial despite challenges. Today, nuclear weapons still influence international relations, with tensions involving North Korea and Iran, and the IAEA playing a critical role. Future research should focus on improving non-proliferation, advancing missile defense, and understanding nuclear weapons' long-term effects.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that.